Tech Revision with Mrs. Swanee Pooh. Hi everyone, this video is going to focus on the second part of the selection of materials and components. Let's get into it. So in the previous video, if you watched video 1 of this topic, we were talking about why environmental issues might make a difference with the kind of materials that you choose. So we looked at some different examples of products that are now using more environmentally friendly materials, and especially materials that have been reused. So things like this toothbrush made from recycled plastic, these yoga mats made from damaged wetsuits, and this skateboard here made from fishing nets. You might be thinking, well, what kind of question might come up? And here's an example for you. So here's an example of a type of question that could come up. And this one could be about a 3-mark question. Describe how environmental factors influence the selection and choice of materials and components in manufactured products. Give an example in your answer. So here's some points here that you might want to have a go at this question. And then you can pause and then we can go through the answer together, or you might just want to listen in. But there's some different things how you could structure this answer. So firstly, you might think about why it's important for designers to consider the environment in the first place. You might think about how different material choices could be bad for the environment. And then you need to give an example, a product example, to explain how the designer or the manufacturer has reduced the impact on the environment. So you might want to pause at this point and have a go. On the next slide, we're going to go through the answer. So the 3 different things that we said you could I said you could talk through are, the first thing, why is it important for designers to consider the environment? It might be to reduce the use of finite materials, so materials that are going to be running out. It could be to reduce things like carbon footprint of the company. So if they are using a lot of materials that generate a lot of CO2 in either their extraction or processing and manufacturing of the product, they might want to reduce that right down. And it could be to also preserve valuable resources like some of the gold and precious metals that are used in smartphones. Lots of companies nowadays are trying to get those materials back so that they can be reused. How could the selection of materials be bad for the environment? Well, things like, just one example, use of polymers from crude oil. Quite often those materials go straight into landfill after they are used, things like one-use plastic. And also you get things like microplastics, that even when the plastic has broken down to really small amounts, it can still be in our water sources. Through fractional distillation, you could also have the destruction of habitats, especially in the ocean, oil spills and all sorts of different things. So some examples that you could give, like we said, clothing from plastic bottles, skateboards from fishing nets, yoga mats from wetsuits. But it's just, you know, the choice of materials and the impact on the environment could be something that comes up in the exam. So make sure you've got a few examples that you can talk about, and don't forget to bring in all of those different things about where the material's coming from, the life cycle of the material, because that's going to be really important. Okay, so again, this was one of the focuses of the exam. So today we're going to talk about the last few things: availability of the material and how that influences the choice, because if you haven't got a material that's easy to get, that could affect it. Also the cost of the material, the social factors and the cultural factors influencing the choice. Is it having a negative impact on people or a culture? And then also the ethical factors. So we're going to have a look at something called the FSC and also fair trade. So we've looked at that in the last video, and today we're going to be focusing on this. Just spoke about this. This is what we're going to be focusing on, and the first thing we're going to focus on is availability and cost. So you might want to think about this just for a moment. Why is the availability of materials and components important for designers and manufacturers? And can you think of any examples that have been in the news recently? Now, you might want to think about that to yourself. You could pause the video, or you could carry on listening, because the examples that I'm going to give you are One of the classic ones that happened during lockdown was there was a massive shortage of wood, and also in electronics there's a huge, well, still ongoing shortage of microchips, which are in pretty much all of our kind of electrical or electronic products, and we'll look at these in a little bit more detail. So this chip shortage, which is a shortage of semiconductors like silicon and things like that, has had a really big impact starting in lockdown, but just seems to be continuing now. It's still really hard to get certain products. So there is a big shortage of silicon. There's also a big shortage of facilities that actually make semiconductors and microchips. And these microchips are used in things like the car industry, in graphics cards, in high-end games consoles like the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. And you can see here that the car industry in 2021 is going to lose about $61 billion because of this chip shortage. So, you know, we watched a video about this in our lesson, and one of the things that they said that they were trying to do is think about how they could reuse existing chips that they were making from other things. But it's very difficult for them to make new and exciting products if they can't get these materials to use them, to make them. So that's a good example of a particular component that was a shortage of. Another good example of, and this is a specific material, these are both materials really, is across the world there is a huge shortage of sand because the sand is used in construction all over the world, specifically in concrete, and the sand that's needed comes from riverbeds because the sand on the beach can't be used because of the salt, and also there's a certain type of sand that you need that is suitable for concrete. So this is having a really bad environmental impact because companies are pulling all of the sand out of the bottom of the riverbeds, which is obviously damaging those rivers, causing pollution. So there is a big problem with the availability of this, which is going to have an environmental impact and also an impact on how quickly things can be made. Same with wood, timbers. There was a big shortage during lockdown. They didn't predict that shortage, mostly based on people getting a lot of work done around their homes, lots of DIY going on, and it's still it's sending the kind of cost of those things kind of skyrocketing. So, you know, a shortage of materials makes everything more expensive. So that's availability in terms of how that can impact. So you've got some examples there already. The impact of the availability of the microchips in all of those different types of products, and also the availability of materials like sand and wood. Right, now we're going to quickly talk about something called bulk buying. What it means, why it's an advantage, why it could be risky, and this is quite a good question here at the bottom. Why would bulk buying not work for just-in-time manufacturing? You might want to pause here and have a quick think about these. We're going to go through the answers on the next slide. So bear with me, all of the answers came on at once, so I'm just going to go through them one at a time. So what does bulk buying actually mean? Well, it means buying large amounts of materials and components at the same time. And you get something called the economy of scale. So the more you buy, the cheaper it tends to be. So the advantage there is it almost always reduces the cost, as material suppliers will give a discount if you are investing in a huge amount of materials. Why this could be risky is if you bought a huge amount of materials to make a certain product, what are you going to do if the demand for that product suddenly reduces? That could be an issue because you might end up with a load of purple t-shirt material, and then suddenly no one wants that color, or it's not fashionable to have that color anymore, and you have then invested so much money in a certain material, it's going to be a big loss for the company. Also, if you're having to buy huge amounts of materials, you're going to have to store them, so they could become damaged, which is obviously a bit of a risk. The reason it wouldn't work well for just-in-time manufacturing is just-in-time manufacturing relies on materials and components only arriving when they are needed. So just-in-time manufacturing, you do not have warehouses to store huge amounts of materials. You just buy what you need, and as soon as you've got it in, it goes out. It's made, it goes. And the reason that just-in-time manufacturing is really successful is it allows the manufacturers to quickly change the types of products that they're making. So if they bulk ordered huge amounts of the same kind of material, they might have to suddenly change to something else, and it just won't work. So bulk buying, dead easy, could come up in the exam, but that is what bulk buying means. Some other things that you might need to consider are some social responsibility, so almost like how it affects people. So if you are buying a certain product, it could have a social impact. And also there is an ethical factor. So these are kind of similar. Ethics being, are you doing something wrong? Is it you know, do you feel right doing that thing? Are you hurting people by choosing a particular product? But what we're going to talk about is finite versus renewable resources. So when you buy a product, do you think, oh, it comes from a finite or a renewable resource? Because that could be a way of being more socially responsible or more ethical. You might think about something called provenance, which is all about where things come from. Are you buying things that are from an ethical supplier? And similar with working conditions, are you buying a product that comes from a place where the workers are being mistreated? So let's think firstly about finite and renewable resources. So between these two, polystyrene and moulded paper pulp, which one do you think is from a finite resource and which one is renewable? Exactly right. Well, I hope you're right. Polystyrene comes from a finite resource. It comes from it's a type of plastic. It comes from crude oil. It cannot be recycled. Moulded paper pulp is just from paper that's moulded into the shape of the product, much more environmentally friendly, and comes from a renewable source. So the winner on this one is the moulded pulp packaging. This one, which would be the winner on this one? Which one is more environmentally friendly? We've got PLA and we've got HIPS. You may have hopefully guessed correctly. PLA is the more environmentally friendly option because this type of plastic, which we use at school for 3D printing, comes from sugar, and that makes it a renewable source because you can grow it. It doesn't come from crude oil like HIPS, which is a thermoplastic, and that is not a renewable source. So PLA is the winner on this option. These two are quite interesting. You've got a pine bench, which is softwood, and a teak bench, which is hardwood. So if you've watched the video about timbers, you might realise that the difference between softwood and hardwood is one has a bit more of an environmental impact. So hopefully you've guessed it. The teak bench, it's kind of a trick question because they are both from renewable resources, but the hardwood takes a lot longer to grow, and therefore if it was being cut down in large amounts would have more of an environmental impact. Softwood grows quicker and is going to be easier to renew. So I would say the more environmentally friendly version of this product is the softwood pine bench. Last one for this is the aluminium water can or the PET plastic bottle. Now I think it's pretty obvious that aluminium is the much more environmentally friendly option, and the massive advantage of aluminium is it can be really easily recycled. It does actually come from a finite resource, so again this is a little bit of a trick because neither of these are renewable, but the difference here is aluminium can be recycled over and over and over and over. It's easily recycled, rather than PET can be recycled a few times but often ends up in landfill. So aluminium is a much more environmentally friendly option for this kind of product. Right, we're going to talk really briefly about working conditions. I think you will have done lots of this kind of stuff in other subjects, maybe in geography, maybe in other things around school, but the working conditions that you buy that are being that people are being exposed to all over the world could have an impact on your choice in a product. So I've got these two questions here about, would you stop buying from a company that used child workers in their factories? And there are companies that have exploited or used Syrian children to make products, and ASOS and Marks and Spencer's were caught doing that. And also the Apple factories in China. The top right hand picture is actually a picture from inside of one of those factories, where you can see all of the workers literally just sleeping because they are working such long hours. So, you know, would you stop buying from a company that made their employees work long hours for very little pay? So the sad thing is that most companies use things like this. It's just trying to make sure that, you know, they are being held accountable for this and making sure that there is some kind of fair working conditions, or they are investing in the country that they are making their products in. So the next two slides, we're going to talk about things that could help you make more ethical choices. So those things are, so thinking about where your products are coming from, the FSC, this logo here, you may have seen that before. You will see it mostly on paper products, like newspapers and magazines and types of packaging and cardboard. What is it? The FSC, basically they manage forests. They make sure that they are not cut down in massive amounts. And what they also do is they maintain the biodiversity of forests. They make sure that the animals and things that live in the forest are not, you know, their habitats are not being destroyed. But also they look after people. They make sure that the workers in that forest are being looked after. They pay them good wages. They make sure that indigenous people, for example, in the rainforest, those kind of indigenous tribes, have their rights of ownership of certain land respected, and they contribute to communities where they are working. So if you bought a product that had an FSC label on it, it means that it's come from an environmental but also an ethical source. As well as this, you'll all know this hopefully, fair trade logo can be applied to a huge range of products. Some of them ones that maybe you haven't or you didn't realise were fair trade. Things like diamonds, things like cotton. The main thing that you kind of think of is chocolate and bananas, but also different types of materials can be fair trade. And obviously the main reason or the main aim of this is to make sure that people are growing these products or finding these materials, they have got equal pay and good trade relationships with the people that buy the products. So higher prices for exporters, but also they they invest in communities and they protect the environment and try to make sure that the farmers are using environmental methods of growing their crops. So less pesticides, less genetically modified crops, all that sort of stuff. So we've spoken about a huge range of different things there, everything from the availability of different materials to bulk buying to the ethical sourcing of materials. I hope that was helpful, and this is the kind of thing that could come up on the exam. So make sure you are happy with a few different examples of these products, and I will see you on the next video.